Welcome to the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. At Mother Earth News, for 50 years and counting, we've been dedicated to conserving the planet's natural resources while helping you conserve your financial resources. In this podcast, we host conversations with experts in the fields of sustainability, homesteading, natural health, and more to share all about how you can live well wherever you are in a way that values both people and our Mother Earth. So settle in and enjoy today's episode. Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of the Mother Earth News and Friends podcast. I'm Jessica Mitchell, and joining me today is Indy Officinalis. We're going to be learning more about Indy, her new show, Farm Dreams, and we're going to get some seed starting tips. So welcome to the podcast, Indy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Huge fan of Mother Earth News.
We're really excited to have you too. So I'd love to jump into our episode today. First, just learning a little bit about you. So can you tell us a little more about who you are and what you do?
Yeah. So I would say, first and foremost, I'm a food grower and educator. I grow food mostly for underserved communities, and I spend a lot of time teaching other people tips about sustainability, how to grow their own food. I also teach folks how to forage as well. So those are kind of my main hobbies turned career.
That's amazing. And it's so cool that you were able to find that way to turn that into your day-to-day job as well.
Yeah. And then of course I always forget now I'm the host of Farm Dreams on on Nat Geo. New title.
Yeah, and then there's that. So in your line of work with farming, working with nature, foraging, community engagement and activism, all of that stuff, what are you seeing in those areas that you think will pave the way for a sustainable, climate resilient future? That's something we love focusing on in Mother Earth News, seeing what that future can look like. So I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm really inspired by what I've seen since 2020 in regards to just how the human spirit seems to be renewed. I know that collectively as a world, we've gone through some really hard times together, and, hard times create strong people. And I've always kind of hated that phrase. But I do see us moving towards more resiliency and more sustainability, really just through human nature, because unfortunately, right now, it's not that the planet itself is able to just, heal itself. It isn't able to heal its soil on its own or the ocean. So it's really up to us as humans. And in the past, I think that collectively as humans, we haven't focused on that as much. But I think food insecurity and food scarcity has really risen to the forefront of all of our minds. So I think that humans, for the first time since I've been on this planet, really seem like they're moving in a positive direction towards helping to heal the planet.
That is a really encouraging thought, and that's awesome that you're seeing that in your line of work. Now, to talk about that show, Farm Dreams, I really enjoyed going through some of those episodes. It was just so fun to watch that and see how you're going around and helping people find solutions to their farms. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that show, what it's about, where people can watch it, and what are you most excited for viewers to watch and learn from this show?
So Farm Dreams is almost set up in a farm makeover style. There are 6 episodes. And I kind of, consider the episodes to be like there's a farm for everyone. So in each episode, we tackle a different style of farming. So in one, we're visiting vertical hydroponic farms and solving some of the issues that come along with that style of growing. Another episode, we look at aquaculture and aqua farming and spend a lot of time looking at seaweed and kelp farming. And then there's small backyard farming and rooftop farming. So I always encourage folks, to check out the show, even if you're like, hey, I don't know how to drive a tractor and I, know nothing about traditional agriculture. There are a lot of episodes that really focus on just different styles of farming that are more accessible to different folks. And it's fun. It's a feel-good show. I feel like we're coming out of this, and I'm guilty of this too, coming out of this era where we're watching like serial killer documentaries and exposés and all of that fun, kind of dark media we've all been consuming. But I feel like this is such a departure from that. It's very educational, and I hope people find it to be very joyous and uplifting and empowering. You can watch it's on Disney Plus, on Hulu, and then it streams like on regular linear cable television on Nat Geo Wild.
I love what you said about how there's a kind of a different types of farming for each episode. And it was really cool. Like, I mean, I'm nowhere near the ocean, but I loved when you went, I think it was Alaska, right? Up where they were farming like seaweed and stuff. And that was really cool. But then there was also some really accessible things, like there was a group of friends who are in this neighborhood and trying to create this community garden. And it was a very small plot. And that was something that was like, oh, that's so applicable to where I live too.
And I feel like for folks who even aren't near the ocean and they're like, oh, well, I can't grow seaweed. I talk a little bit in that episode about using seaweed in your traditional farming because it's really great for the soil. It can be really expensive. So finding someone who grows seaweed and using that in your garden, in your backyard, on your farm is another way to help be a part of that style of farming.
Absolutely. All right. Well, for those listeners, definitely catch Farm Dreams. It's such a fun show and so uplifting, just like what Indy said. So, to get into some of the meat of our episode, we're going to be talking about seed starting. But I remember in I want to say one of the first episodes of Farm Dreams, you were helping show a couple how to seed start in their home. And I remember you talking a little bit about how much you really enjoyed it. And before we get into the definition of seed starting and everything, what do you really love most about that whole process of starting seeds?
I think seed starting is for, people who love puppies and babies. It's like getting to be there at the beginning. It's, a moment filled with hope. A lot of folks, who live in places that have the four seasons, it's something you can sit down and do inside where it's warm, have a cup of tea, have a glass of wine, whatever. It's an activity for the whole family. So I love it because with a lot of the populations that I've worked with are folks who are differently abled, people who don't get to spend as much time outside, who have trouble bending over and working in soil that's established on like an established farm. They can start seeds. Kids can start seeds. So it's really accessible. One of those fun activities that makes you feel good.
It is really exciting when you start to see those seeds come out of the soil too. It's a really magical moment, I think. How would you give a general definition of seed starting for those who might be really new to that process? And when would someone start seeds?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Like, what is the definition of seed starting? So, I would describe seed starting as just setting up your plant, your seed for its best possible future. So you're helping to encourage germination in a nice controlled environment. If you're just starting out with seed starting, it's important to differentiate which seeds should be started indoors, should be started in pots versus ones that you should direct sow into your garden. And my rule of thumb has always been root vegetables. You should definitely start those outdoors because you want the root to be able to hang out where it's going to be for the entirety of its life. So like carrots, beets, turnips, radishes, you can just broadcast those seeds. You'll notice that those seeds are super tiny. You should just fling them out into your garden and let them land where they may, and then later thin out the ones that you don't want. So root vegetables, annual flowers that are going to, bloom once a year. I start those outdoors too. I think transplanting flowers from inside outside, hasn't worked well for me in the past. I also, certain things that vine, I like to start outdoors so that they can grow right next to whatever trellis I'm going to put them on. So I do tend to start beans outdoors, but I know that people do start them indoors. So that's one of those things that maybe it's just kind of a preference for different people. And then seeds that you would start indoors. For me, those are things that are like tomatoes, peppers, things where I'm going to pluck and eat the fruiting body, and things that are a little bit more delicate. Yeah, tomatoes, peppers, strawberries. I also like to start indoors in flats. It's also like what is going to be the use of your plants. If you're growing food to give them away, then I would start them indoors. So like for me personally, when I'm growing outside, I start my onions outside because it works well where I live in California. But if I'm growing food for a community and I'm planning on giving it away, giving it to friends, I have a lot of seeds, then I'll start little onions inside. It's so dependent on where you live in the country, right? So here in California, I can start a lot more things outside because we don't have the danger of frost. But the big benefit of starting seeds indoors is that you're protecting them from the frost. You're starting things early, you're extending your growing season because you already have stuff growing inside. It's nice, it's warm, it's happy, it's healthy. And then later, once you're, past that frost date, you can transfer it outside.
I love that point that you noted too about how where you live in the country is also going to be a huge contributing factor to what you're going to start when and where.
Totally. I know. I wish there was a universal advice for for when to start things and where to start things. So when it comes to germination, I'm always paying attention to, I use the acronym TWO or TOW, but temperature, water, and oxygen. Those are the most important parts of seed starting. And I think that there's this pretty big misconception that you need soil to start seeds, when in reality, starting seeds in soil is something that you can do. But for me, the big benefit of starting seeds in soil is just keeping the seed itself dark. So that's where the oxygen comes in. It's just like seeds do the best when they're covered and dark and not in direct sun. So my personal favorite seed starting mix I make myself. I use perlite, vermiculite. I throw in compost for once the seed is a little bit bigger and it's grown some of its true leaves and it starts to need that nitrogen, then the compost starts to take over the work. But starting seeds in like a heavy, thick soil is going to really make it harder for those like little baby roots that you're trying to establish. Is going to make it harder for them to move through the soil. So I like to use like a light, airy kind of seed starting soil-less medium.
Now, one question for people who are just starting out with seed starting: is seed starting a venture that could be expensive or one where you need a lot of space? For gardeners who maybe have a small square footage to work with and maybe not such a big budget, what advice or maybe even just some comfort you would give them to show them that this can be an accessible thing for everybody?
It really does not have to be expensive. Even the idea of like a soil-less medium sounds expensive, but you can buy just like a seed starting cheapo mix, probably at like your local dollar store. If you have access to like somewhat healthy soil in your backyard and you buy like a bag of perlite or vermiculite and mix that in just to add a little bit more aeration, like I was mentioning for those delicate, new baby roots. You can do it that way. It can be as simple as, I think a lot of us did this in elementary school. You can just take a wet paper towel, put the seeds in there and throw it into a plastic Ziploc bag to keep in some of that moisture. It really doesn't have to be expensive. I think it's important to remember that, in order to germinate, the seed doesn't need anything. It has everything that it needs to begin that germination process. So it's really just about giving it that, warm temperature, making sure that it's hydrated, making sure it has water, and making sure it has oxygen.
Now, you did touch on this already with those essential elements you need to successfully start seeds. Maybe do you want to also add in some tips for those things that seeds need if those elements aren't quite there yet in the space naturally, some maybe pieces of inexpensive equipment or tools that gardeners can have on hand?
So you can start seeds in like little plastic trays, little plastic pots. If your house stays cool, I've lived in places where, we're warming up the entire house by a wood stove. I would purchase a heat mat and you can just put that right under your little seedling trays. I would say that that's the only major equipment that I would I would recommend for folks. Once seedlings do develop those true leaves, so like not the little cotyledon leaves, but the second set of leaves that look more like the leaves that they're going to look like. So it's like with a tomato seed, you're going to see those two cotyledon leaves that look like just round random leaves, and then you're going to get those tomatoey looking leaves. Once it has those are the leaves that are, able to use photosynthesis. So that's when you might want to incorporate a grow light once the plant needs sun, if it's still too cold out to transfer your tomato plants. If you're starting them that early, I would start them a little later in the year. A grow light could be helpful, but a windowsill usually works really well. And I always tell people, like, don't overdo it with the light, especially at the beginning of seed starting, because what I've seen happen with a lot of folks is that, like, light to the young seedling can cause it to expel carbonic acid, which is going to make the young seedling not able to absorb as much oxygen. And so then you're going to get this hard seed that never really germinates. I encourage people to just not overdo it with the light and help that little seedling get as much oxygen as it can. So keep it in the dark if possible.
Now, we talked about transferring the seeds outdoors definitely after the first frost date has passed. Can you maybe talk a little bit about some resources that gardeners can find to help them maybe determine that frost date, or any other indicators with either the seeds or the environment that'll tell them, like, hey, this is a great time to start transferring them outside?
Yeah. I mean, you can learn so much from your seed packet. Most seed packets on the back tell you when to put the seedling outside. And then also you can just look online and, look up what agricultural growing zone you're in. I think that's really important for helping to determine your first and last frost dates. You can pick up a farmer's almanac and use that as well. So, getting to know what growing zone you're in, I think, is really important.
And we can put some links down in the show notes of this episode's for listeners. So we could link to even just the hardiness zone, so you know what zone you're living in, and then also some of those resources that Indy mentioned to help you understand when that last frost date is going to be and when to start transferring your plants. What are a couple common challenges maybe that someone may run into when starting seeds, maybe either indoors or during that transfer process? Are there any really big ones that come up? I know you mentioned that one with the seed, but are there any other ones that come to mind?
Let's see. Commonly household pets, particularly cats, love knocking things off of counters. I've talked to so many people that they're like, I've tried to grow this over and over. My cat knocks it over. So starting seeds, up high in your house, I think, has a lot of benefits. It's also naturally warmer up high. So if you have any sort of loft area, tall shelves, I recommend that. With a lot of the folks who were unhoused that I worked with in growing food, we would use those little plastic, like, to-go containers that you get from like food, like hot food bars or whatever, because it's like you're making a mini greenhouse for your seedlings. So having something that covers your seedlings as they're trying to grow, keeps some of that humidity in, keeps the temperature up if you don't have access to a seed mat. Yeah, so I do see a lot of issues with people using too heavy of a soil, and the roots aren't able to establish as well as they would with a more lighter mix like we talked about. But, I don't want people to overthink it, because it's really a simple thing. Like, when I work with kids, we do this all the time. We just throw a seed in a wet paper towel, put it in a bag, and it's good to go. So different plants, there's some plants that are just straight up hard to get to germinate. I think sweet alyssum is one of them. There's just some plants that it's like, no matter what you do, it's difficult. Don't be afraid of failure. Just keep trying.
Absolutely. Well, we have this question from a reader, and they have a very specific scenario with them trying to start some seeds. So they said, I've started some green cotton seeds several times inside on a heat pad with grow lights. They pop up happily and then stall around 4 weeks. I can't put them outside until late April or May, but I want them to have a good start since growing season here is not all that long for them. Is that a situation that you might have a couple thoughts about, or maybe even just generally speaking, if there's a plant inside that's stalling, but it's not, you can't quite put them outside yet?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. Cotton can be interesting because it really does like to be warm. And so, when you're not able to transfer it out and you're getting kind of what it sounds like is just like, some later failure to thrive, I would ask the person when they're putting the grow lights on the seedlings, because how we talked about the carbonic acid and oxygen, and trying to keep them in the dark for as long as possible. I think that that's really important. I don't have a lot of experience with growing cotton, but I do know from my small attempts that they do love nitrogen rich soil. So I would say adding compost in. They need nitrogen for the entirety of their growth cycle, which isn't that common. Usually I cycle through the different amendments that I'm adding to plants like tomatoes and peppers. But with cotton, you're going to want to give them nitrogen rich amendments for the entirety of their growth. So that could be an issue. Maybe just adding in more compost to that starting mix. It sounds like they're doing a lot right, keeping them on a heat mat, because temperature with those warm loving plants, trying to keep the soil temperature around like 60 degrees Fahrenheit is what I would strive for. I would say trial and error. Maybe start with a new batch of seeds. It could be something about those seeds have gotten hard, and so they're struggling a little bit. That's one of those things, like that's what I loved so much about doing the show Farm Dreams. It's just like going to someone's house and seeing exactly what they're doing from start to finish and pinpointing things that way. So yeah, I guess those would be my major advice. Start with adding in more nitrogen.
As we are wrapping up our seed starting conversation, I was curious, do you have any favorite seeds that you really enjoy starting each season?
I can be the kind of lazy gardener that does love starting seeds outdoors and just like throwing down a bunch of carrots. That's so fun for me. But as far as starting things inside, I love starting peppers. I'm like a hot sauce girl to the core. I love spicy food. Anything that's purple, like purple peppers, purple tomatoes, those are some of my favorite things to start indoors. And then I don't know why I feel like I need to mention this, but randomly I was just thinking, like, we had talked earlier about, seeds that you should start outside. Corn is a huge one. I've seen people starting corn inside, and it just does so much better if you direct sow it. So I don't know. I'm sure most folks know that, but just a reminder.
I love those purple peppers. I didn't even know purple peppers existed until a few years ago. I never saw them before at my grocery store.
One of my favorites is the Buena Mulata. I love starting, rare and heirloom seeds that have been carried through generations.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Well, we are super excited because you're going to be joining us at the Wisconsin Fair very soon. It's coming up real quick.
No, I know. I need to get a plane ticket.
I know everybody's getting their transportation organized. So I'd love to ask, what are you most excited about to share with folks at the fair, and what are you excited to experience yourself?
Yeah, I'm just so excited to meet all the other folks that are going to be there. There's just so many other people that I can learn from, and that's what I love doing. I feel like that's what Farm Dreams is all about, is just like talking to other farmers and figuring out how we can network and how we can help each other and learn from one another. I'm excited to share more information with everyone about Farm Dreams and about what that process was. And I always want to kind of hone in that how authentic the experience of the show is for me, because I know that there's this idea that TV is just like scripted and not real, but we worked really hard as a team to make sure that we were having these authentic experiences and like really getting into the heart of America and the heart of American farming. So just sharing some of those trial and errors and some of the funny things that happened along the way, where it's just like you're dealing with a production crew and you're like, no, that's not how plants work. We can't just do that. So there were a lot of funny moments like that. But yeah, I'm so looking forward to it.
It's going to be a great weekend. For listeners, if you want to come to the Wisconsin Fair, we'll provide a link in the show notes, or just go to motherearthnewsfair.com. You'll see the Wisconsin Fair right there, and you can sign up and register for your tickets. Indy's going to be there along with a bunch of other great guests, so it's just going to be such a great weekend.
I am so looking forward to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Now, is there anything you want to plug at the end here for where people can follow you and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. Right now, I mostly share things on Instagram. So my Instagram handle is Indy Officinalis. And, of course, watching Farm Dreams is, super helpful. We're always hoping for a season 2 so that we can help more farmers. And then, catch me in person. I'm at Community Gardens. If you're local to the Los Angeles area and you want help on your farm or garden, I'm always, available to help.
Wonderful. Well, we'll include those links as well so people can follow what you're doing. But thank you so much, Indy, for this great podcast episode. It was so awesome to talk with you and learn from you. And I know this is just going to be such a great resource for our listeners.
Yay, thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Mother Earth News and Friends. To listen to more podcasts, to learn more, and get connected on our social media, visit our website, www.motherearthnews.com/podcast. You can also email us at podcast@ogdenpubs.com with any comments, questions, or suggestions. Our podcast production team includes Kenny Coogan, Jessica Mitchell, John Moore, and Alyssa Warner. Music for this episode is Travel Light by Jason Shaw. The Mother Earth News and Friends podcast is a production of Ogden Publications. At Mother Earth News, we love making friends all across the country and around the world through our magazines, fairs, podcasts, and more. During this past Labor Day weekend, our Farm Collector and Gas Engine magazines had the pleasure of sharing a tent with the Cast Iron Seed Collectors Association at the Midwest Old Threshers Reunion. So, we wanted to take a moment to mention our friends at the association as they celebrate their 50th anniversary. Check out their podcast called Chasing Farm Primitives and Creating Friends by Thomas Wilson and the Cast Iron Seed Collectors Association. Tom and friends discuss chasing and collecting cast iron farm primitives while creating lifelong friendships. Find their podcast on Spotify. Until next time, don't forget to love your mother.